The conference room went silent when Ethan Pierce folded his arms, looked straight at me, and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm going to need someone who actually understands this proposal." A second later, one of the client executives on the screen frowned and asked, "Wait, you're telling me you can't explain your own numbers?" And that was the exact moment I realized my life had cracked open in front of 24 people, a glass wall, and a camera lens. My name is Maren Blake, and for 4 years I had been the quiet woman in the corner office with the neat stacks of notes, the plain black coffee, and the habit of saying less than I knew. I was the person who stayed late, fixed the mistakes nobody noticed, and built proposals so strong they kept a struggling department alive. And for 4 years, Ethan Pierce had walked into executive meetings with a charming smile, a perfect haircut, and my work sitting in his hands like it had always belonged to him. He loved the spotlight. I built the stage. That morning, when the client presentation collapsed, I did not speak right away. I just watched Ethan's face change color, watched the executives exchange those tiny, deadly glances people use when they've just realized they were sold a story. Then I looked down at my folder, closed it slowly, and felt something inside me go very still. Not broken, not crying, just still. Because this wasn't the first thing he had stolen from me. It had started long before that room, long before the client call, long before Ethan got promoted while I got passed over. It started with my family. I grew up in a small brick house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, where my mother worked double shifts at a pharmacy, and my father disappeared into bad luck and worse decisions before I was old enough to understand what gone really meant. My grandmother, Ruth Blake, was the one who kept our lives from splitting apart. She had sharp eyes, a warm kitchen, and a voice that could turn fear into something manageable. She taught me how to check the oil in a car, how to balance a checkbook, and how to make people listen when they thought you were too soft to matter. When she passed away, she left my mother the house and a modest inheritance. Nothing glamorous, just enough to keep us safe, pay off old debts, and make sure my younger brother Trevor had a shot at finishing school. My mother cried when she read the will, and Trevor, who was 21 and already acting like the world owed him a standing ovation, said the house was too old, and the money should be invested properly. He said that with a straight face, like he wasn't the same boy who once borrowed my bus money and never paid it back. Trevor always had a talent for sounding smarter than he was. He talked fast, smiled easily, and made every problem sound like someone else's fault. He'd get into a mess, charm his way out of it, and leave everybody else holding the damage. My mother loved him in the way exhausted mothers love the child who demands the most attention. She saw his charm before she saw his hunger. She saw his confidence before she saw his greed. I was the one she called when the bills were due and the phone company was threatening to shut us off. I learned early that being quiet made people underestimate you. At first, I hated that. Then I learned how to use it. I worked my way through community college, earned my degree in business administration, and landed a job at Halden and Voss, a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Columbus that handled project proposals for infrastructure clients, healthcare systems, and tech startups. I wasn't the loudest one in the room. I wasn't the person who slapped his hands on the table and said, "Trust me." I was the woman who showed up early, checked every detail, and made sure the numbers were sound enough to survive attack. Ethan Pierce noticed me on my third month there. He was our senior account manager, the kind of man who could make a bad idea sound like a visionary breakthrough. Everybody liked Ethan. He remembered birthdays, brought pastries, laughed at the right volume, and called people by first name, as if he were one of them. He had that polished, effortless kind of charm that makes people forget they should be careful. My first impression of him was actually positive. He held doors. He complimented my work on a client summary. He told me my analysis was scary good and asked if I'd help him tighten a proposal for a logistics company. "Only if you want the numbers to behave," I told him. He grinned. "That is exactly what I want." I stayed up late that week and built him a proposal that was sharp, clean, and almost impossible to tear apart. He presented it in a leadership meeting, and 2 days later, our division director, Sandra Vale, called him out in front of everybody for producing one of the strongest pitches of the quarter. Ethan smiled. He thanked the team. He did not mention me once. I remember that moment because I was standing near the printer, holding a stack of revised spreadsheets, and for a second I thought he had simply forgotten. Then later, in the break room, I heard him telling two coworkers that he had reworked the whole thing himself after some rough early drafts. I should have corrected him then. I should have said, "Actually, those drafts were mine too." But I didn't. I just stood there with my coffee getting cold and told myself it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. After that, it became a pattern. Ethan would need something urgent, and I'd be the one who built it. He'd ask for a data model, a presentation outline, a risk assessment, a client response strategy. I'd work quietly, carefully, and sometimes with a little pride because I believed hard work would eventually speak for itself. Then Ethan would walk into the meeting room looking like the hero of the hour, and people would praise his insight, his leadership, his instinct. Mine lived in the margins, hidden behind his smile. I started staying later to make sure the documentation carried my logic in case anyone bothered to look. I kept email trails, I saved drafts, I timestamped everything, I even told myself I was being paranoid. I thought maybe, if I just kept producing excellent work, eventually someone like Sandra would notice the pattern and ask the right questions. Sandra did notice me, but not in the way I hoped. She noticed that Ethan communicated more confidently and that I was a brilliant support player. Support player. I still remember the way she said it. Almost kindly, like she was handing me a compliment wrapped in a lid. The worst part was that Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. He was not accidentally forgetting. He was not clueless. He was building a reputation on my labor, and he was doing it with the kind of easy smile that made people trust him while they were being fooled. At home, things were getting ugly in a different way. My mother's health had started to fail after a winter flu turned into something that never fully cleared up. Not dramatic, not immediate, just a slow thinning of her energy. She still worked when she could, but she tired quickly, and Trevor used every crack in her exhaustion to push his own agenda. He wanted the house sold. "Mom," he'd say, drumming his fingers on the kitchen table, "this place is sitting on valuable land. It's a waste to keep pouring money into repairs. We should sell, split the proceeds, and move you somewhere easier." My mother would look at him with her tired eyes and say, "This house is not just numbers, Trevor. It's home." He'd shrug. "Home doesn't pay property taxes." Then he'd turn to me and say, "Maren, be practical for once. You're always so emotional about everything." I wanted to laugh when he called me emotional. I was the one who paid the electric bill when he forgot. I was the one who made sure Mom had her prescriptions. I was the one who noticed that Trevor had started talking about her inheritance as if he were entitled to a larger share just because he could say the word investment without stumbling. There were nights I came home from work and found him in our mother's study, going through her papers. He'd say he was helping organize things. My mother, too trusting and too tired to fight, would nod and let him keep talking. I started locking up the important documents, which made him sneer at me like I was being dramatic. He always hated me a little for seeing him clearly. That was the month my life reached its first real breaking point. Halden and Voss won the bid on a major healthcare technology project, the kind of account that could change the future of a department. The client wanted a multi-phase implementation proposal, and Sandra assigned the internal lead role to Ethan. Not me. Even though everyone knew I had been doing the heavy lifting on the proposal architecture, even though I had built the financial scenario models and drafted the implementation roadmap, even though Ethan had literally asked me to stay late 2 nights in a row so he could review the strategy I created, I found out about the assignment in a team meeting. Sandra smiled at Ethan and said, "You've shown great leadership on this project. I want you presenting the final proposal to the board next month." Then she looked at me and added, "And Maren, thank you for your behind-the-scenes support. It's invaluable." I looked at Ethan. He didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He just gave me that polished, grateful smile and said, "Couldn't do it without the team." That was when I finally understood that my silence was not humility. It was permission. I went to Sandra's office after the meeting. She looked up from her laptop, calm and businesslike. "Maren, you have something on your mind." I sat down and placed my folder on her desk. Inside were dated drafts, comments, revisions, and email threads showing exactly how much of the proposal had come from me. I want you to look at these, I said. She barely glanced at them. What am I looking at? The work I've been doing, Ethan's presentations, the revisions, the original models. He's been taking credit for my contributions for months. She leaned back in her chair, and I could see that little wall go up inside her eyes. The one managers build when they have already decided they do not want an uncomfortable truth. Maren, she said, I know you're very invested in the project, but Ethan is the account lead. Sometimes strong contributors need to learn how to work within team structure. I stared at her. He has literally been presenting my work as his own. Sandra gave a small sigh. The kind people use when they want you to feel childish for being upset. It's important to be a team player. Credits can be adjusted informally if necessary, but I don't want us making this bigger than it needs to be. There it was. Not denial, not concern, management. I left her office feeling heat rise behind my eyes, but I did not cry. I walked back to my desk, opened a blank document, and typed 3 words at the top. Stop helping Ethan. That night at home, Trevor was waiting for me in the kitchen, grinning like he had won something. You know what Mom said? He asked. I set my bag down. No, and I don't care. She said she might actually consider selling if it helps keep things fair. I turned slowly. Fair? He leaned against the counter. You're always acting like you're the only responsible one in this family. Maybe if you were less controlling, things would go smoother. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. You mean smoother for you? He shrugged, unbothered. I'm just saying, someday you might have to accept that not everything belongs to you. That sentence hit me harder than it should have, because it was exactly the kind of thing Ethan would say with a smile. The next morning, I stopped sending Ethan the extra documents he'd grown used to receiving. I still did my assigned work, but I no longer made him look smart in the process. I no longer polished his slides after hours. I no longer rewrote his talking points to sound more convincing. I became professional in the strictest sense of the word. Polite, efficient, and unavailable. At first, Ethan didn't notice. Or maybe he thought I was just busy. Then he started hovering. Hey, Maren, he said one afternoon, trying to look casual. Did you happen to finish those updated risk scenarios? I finished my assigned analysis, I replied. If you need additional support, you can submit a request through the project tracker. His smile tightened for half a second. Come on, we're a team. That's what I thought too. He chuckled lightly, as if I'd made a joke. You're in a mood. I'm in a job, I said. He stared at me a beat too long before walking away. By the following week, he was suddenly paying me compliments in front of others. He praised my precision. He said I was the backbone of the operation. He asked Sandra to include me in a few emails, which would have been flattering if his tone hadn't been so calculated. He was laying groundwork, making sure, if I ever pushed back, he could say he'd been generous. Then came the promotion. It was supposed to be mine. I knew that because Sandra had been hinting at it for months. She'd told me I had executive potential, and that the next leadership opening would be a natural step. I had spent nights refining my management presentation, helped train new hires, and led 3 internal strategy reviews that had kept the department from losing its footing. So when Sandra called me into her office and told me Ethan had been selected for the role of senior project strategist, I thought for a second I had misheard her. Ethan? I repeated. She folded her hands. He has stronger visibility with the clients. I've done the work. He's more comfortable presenting it. That's because he's been presenting my work. Sandra's lips pressed together. Maren, I need you to be a little more mature about this. Mature. That word always means shut up when said by the wrong person. She continued. You are essential. This role, however, requires someone who can be a face for the department. My voice came out quieter than I expected. So I'm good enough to build everything, but not good enough to lead it. She didn't answer fast enough. That told me everything. When I left her office, I walked straight to my desk, collected my notebook, and forwarded my personal email a file of every proposal draft, every revision log, every time-stamped comment I had made over the past year. I had already been keeping records. Now I was preparing for war, not the loud kind, The kind that happens when the people who use you finally discover the floor disappears beneath them. I stopped helping Ethan completely, and because he had built his reputation on a foundation he did not understand, the whole thing began to wobble almost immediately. It started with a scheduling issue on the healthcare account. Ethan asked me for a technical summary of the integration process. I replied with a brief note directing him to the shared documentation, where the answers were already sitting in plain view. He came over to my desk. Seriously? I kept my eyes on my screen. Seriously. You know what I mean. I do. And my answer is still the same. His voice dropped. What is this, Maren? I looked up at him then. This is me doing my job. He gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. You are not this petty. I almost told him that I was not petty. I was exhausted. I was angry. I was done. But I decided he didn't deserve the explanation. Maybe, I said, but I am done covering for you. His jaw tightened. He walked away without another word. For the first time since I had known him, Ethan looked nervous. The client presentation was set for the following Thursday. It was the most important meeting the department had all year. Representatives from the healthcare company would be there in person, along with our executives, legal counsel, and the chief financial officer of the client side. If the proposal landed, it would become a multi-million-dollar contract. Ethan needed me more than ever, and I knew it. The night before the presentation, I sat at my kitchen table while my mother rested in the next room and reviewed the whole deck one last time for my own peace of mind. I was not planning to sabotage anything. I was planning to let reality happen without my invisible hands holding it up. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. Need to talk. Mom mentioned something about the house. Call me. I stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone face down. When I was younger, I used to think family betrayal had to come with shouting, slammed doors, and dramatic confessions. Real betrayal is usually quieter. It comes in the form of someone smiling while they take what you need. It comes in the form of someone saying, "Trust me," when they have already decided you are useful only until you ask for credit. The next morning, I dressed in a navy blouse and black slacks, same as always. I pinned my hair back, put on the small silver earrings my grandmother had given me years ago, and drove downtown with my stomach folded tight. Ethan was already in the conference room when I arrived. He looked handsome in a way that made people forgive him too quickly. He was animated, joking with the client reps, standing at the front of the room as if he owned the air. He smiled at me when I took my seat. "Glad you could make it." I smiled back, polite as a knife. "Wouldn't miss it." Sandra opened the meeting, praising the work of the department and introducing Ethan as the lead strategist. He stood and launched into the presentation with easy confidence. At first, everything seemed fine. He knew the opening numbers, the broad vision, the polished lines I had written. He clicked through the slides, speaking smoothly about efficiency gains, phased rollout, and cost control. Then one of the client executives, a woman named Denise Harper, interrupted. "Could you walk us through the assumptions behind the staffing conversion model?" Ethan blinked once. "Of course. The model is built on a standard utilization framework." Denise waited. He kept going, vague and slick. "We looked at historical benchmarks and aligned them with projected growth." Denise tilted her head. "That is not quite what I asked. What specific staffing ratios did you use for the second phase transition? And why does the retention curve flatten after month 9? Ethan's hand tightened on the clicker. I could feel the room changing. Those subtle shifts people make when they realize the speaker is skating. He said, "I'd have to confirm the exact metrics, but the overall structure remains sound." Denise was not smiling anymore. "The proposal is built around those metrics." He nodded a little too fast. "Right. Absolutely." Then another client asked about the integration timeline. Ethan said, "The implementation window is flexible based on operational needs." That answer was wrong. Not completely, but wrong enough to matter. I knew because the exact answer was sitting in the notes I had never given him for the final version. The timeline was not flexible in the way he made it sound. It was dependent on a phased system cutover that had already been scheduled with the vendor. Denise looked down at the printed proposal in front of her. "This is remarkably detailed. Did you personally build the technical architecture?" Ethan laughed lightly, trying to recover. I led the overall concept, yes. Not a lie, exactly. Just enough to be dangerous. Denise wasn't buying it. Then maybe you can explain the discrepancy on page 12 between the cost-benefit forecast and the vendor escalation clause. Silence. Ethan glanced toward me. Just once. Quick, panicked, unmistakable. That tiny look was all it took to tell the whole room what they needed to know. He did not know the answer. He had never known the answer. And now the people across the table could see it too. Sandra shifted in her seat. Let's not get too deep into the weeds. The proposal is meant to present a strategic direction. Denise folded her hands. A strategic direction should still be internally consistent. The room went quiet enough for me to hear the air conditioner hum. Then Ethan made the mistake that doomed him. He said, Maren can probably clarify that. Every head turned to me. I remember the feeling precisely. Not fear, not even anger. More like a door opening. I stood slowly and walked to the front of the room with my folder in hand. Ethan stepped aside, trying to look magnanimous. But his smile was cracking around the edges now. I set my papers down, looked at Denise, and said, You're right to ask. The staffing ratios were based on a 78% utilization ceiling for the transition period, with a contingency buffer built into Phase 2. The retention curve flattens after month 9 because the contract assumes a stabilization milestone once the third site integration is complete. If that milestone slips, the entire cost structure shifts by approximately 11%. Denise's expression changed. That's the answer I was looking for. I nodded. The discrepancy on page 12 exists because the vendor escalation clause was adjusted after the initial draft, but Ethan's presentation file was not updated. The final version accounts for that clause. The printed packet does not. Sandra's eyes widened, though not nearly as much as Ethan's. One of the client reps asked, So the current presentation is based on an outdated packet? I answered evenly. The final digital version on the shared drive contains the corrected numbers. Denise looked from me to Ethan and back again. Were these corrections yours? Yes. That single word hung in the air like a verdict. Ethan cleared his throat. We all worked on it together. I turned to him. No, Ethan. You presented the work. I built the final model, revised the assumptions, updated the timeline, and prepared the technical notes you didn't read. Nobody moved. He stared at me. Why are you doing this right now? Because they asked a direct question, I said. And because I am tired of pretending your confidence is the same thing as competence. Sandra inhaled sharply, but I was too far in now to stop. I looked around the room and said, For months I have been the person behind the versions you saw on this project. Every major revision was mine. Every risk scenario. Every fallback plan. And every time the work succeeded, Ethan stood in front of the room and let people believe he had done it himself. Ethan flushed bright red. That is not true. I took out my phone, opened the email thread, and turned the screen so Denise could see the timestamps. This is the original draft sent from my account. This is the revision history. This is the message asking Ethan to review the updated integration notes after he had already submitted his slides. The client executives began glancing at each other. Not loudly. Worse. Thoughtfully. Sandra stood. Maren, this is not the appropriate time. It's exactly the appropriate time, I said, still calm, still steady. Because if they're going to sign a contract, they deserve to know who actually understands it. Denise looked at Sandra. Frankly, I'd like to know that too. Then another executive asked the question that split the whole room open. If your strategist cannot answer basic technical questions, why is he the one leading this account? Nobody answered. I wish I could say Ethan tried to salvage it with honesty. He did not. He tried to salvage it with anger. That's enough, he snapped. Maren, this is personal. It became personal when you stole my work. He pointed at me. You are trying to ruin this because you didn't get a promotion. I smiled, and I could feel how tired I was right down to my bones. No, I stopped helping because I didn't get honesty. Denise closed her folder. We'll be pausing this review until we receive a corrected presentation and a clear explanation of roles. Sandra rushed to assure her everything was under control, but the room had already changed. Once trust cracks in a client meeting, there is no elegant way to glue it back together. The executives left without signing anything. The meeting ended with polite words and cold faces, which is the professional version of a slammed door. As soon as the door closed behind the last client, Sandra turned on me. "What do you think you've done?" I turned to her. "What should I have done?" "Kept covering for him while you told me to be mature?" She flinched. "You embarrassed the department." "No," I said. "Ethan embarrassed the department. You enabled it." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "You planned this." I met his eyes. "No, Ethan. I simply stopped rescuing you." He looked at me like he wanted to say something cruel, but the words wouldn't come. That was the first time I saw real fear in him. Not the charming kind he used to manipulate people, but the naked fear of a person whose costume has just been ripped off in public. Sandra demanded we all go to her office immediately. I went. Ethan went. And for once, I did not feel small walking beside him. Sandra shut the door and started pacing. She asked for an explanation. Ethan talked over me, said I'd been difficult, resentful, unpredictable. He claimed I had always wanted more visibility and was now weaponizing my frustration. I waited until he finished. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the documented record, and started reading dates. March 11th, I wrote the initial framework. March 19th, Ethan asked me to revise the staffing assumptions. April 2nd, he presented the revised model as his own. April 17th, I flagged the vendor discrepancy and was told to keep it internal. May 5th, I wrote the technical response to the client's integration concerns, and Ethan sent it under his name with minor edits. Sandra sat down slowly. Ethan's face drained of color. I kept going until I reached the email where Ethan had explicitly asked me to make it sound like I found the issue myself, because he wanted to look proactive. Sandra stared at him. "Did you write that?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The silence was answer enough. It turns out corporate leadership can ignore intuition, but they have a harder time ignoring paper trails. By the end of the day, human resources was involved. By the end of the week, so was legal. The client requested a full internal review before moving forward, which meant the account slipped into damage control mode. Sandra, who had protected Ethan for months, suddenly had to explain why the department's internal documentation did not match the public pitch. And then the thing nobody expected happened. The review uncovered more than Ethan's theft. It found that he had been quietly taking credit for 2 other analysts' work on smaller accounts, too. Not just mine. He had built a whole career on repackaging other people's labor into charm-sized portions and serving them up as brilliance. Once the investigation started, the stories began to surface one by one. A junior analyst with a family in Michigan. A systems coordinator he had promised visibility to. Another woman who said she had stopped speaking up because he always made it sound like I was being emotional. Emotional. There it was again. Sandra's face changed as the pattern became impossible to deny. The department had not just lost a star. It had built a star by dimming everyone else around him. As for me, I expected to be punished. I expected some neat little corporate consequence for disrupting team cohesion. Instead, the opposite happened. The client requested that I be the technical lead on the corrected version of the proposal. I remember reading the email and just sitting there in my chair for a full minute, not moving. The subject line was simple. Request for direct technical liaison. They wanted the woman who knew the proposal inside out, not the man who had smiled at it. Sandra called me into her office again, but this time her voice was different, less polished, more tired. "Maren," she said, "I owe you an apology." I didn't respond. She swallowed. "I should have listened to you earlier." "Yes," I said. "I was wrong." "Yes." That finally made her look up. She didn't seem used to not being forgiven on command. She let out a slow breath. "We're issuing a formal review. Ethan will be removed from the account, and the promotion is being reconsidered." I leaned back in my chair. "Reconsidered?" She nodded. "After what happened, the executive team wants a different structure. They've already asked for you to step into an interim lead role." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt calm, because the thing I had wanted most was not revenge. It was recognition. The chance to stand where I had always been standing and be seen. So now I'm visible, I said. Sandra flinched again. I stood and picked up my folder. For the record, I didn't do any of this for the promotion. I know that now. No, I said. You know it because it became expensive not to know it. That same evening, Trevor called. I answered because my mother was in the other room and because I could already tell from his voice that he was about to ask for something. You need to come home, he said. What happened? Mom told me she changed the beneficiary on the house records. I felt my spine go straight. What does that mean? It means she transferred the property trust. To who? He paused. To you. I closed my eyes. Of course he hated that. I got home an hour later, and my mother was sitting at the kitchen table looking tired but strangely peaceful. Trevor was pacing behind her like a caged animal. Tell her, he said. My mother looked up at me. I wanted to make sure the house stays with the person who actually takes care of it. Trevor let out a bitter laugh. So that's it? I'm just nothing now? You're not nothing, she said. But you tried to turn your brother's inheritance into your own opportunity, and I saw that. He pointed at me. She filled your head with this. My mother shook her head. No. You filled your own head with greed. Trevor's face hardened. I've been trying to help this family. I actually laughed. You mean help yourself? He turned to me, furious now. You think you're better than me because you work long hours and act like a saint? I think I'm better than you because when I say I'm helping, I mean it. He stepped forward. You always wanted Mom's approval more than me. That one landed close enough to hurt, because a part of me had always known it was true. I had wanted her to see me, to value me, to understand how much of our stability had been built on my back. Trevor had wanted things. I had wanted acknowledgement. My mother stood up with surprising steadiness. This house is not a prize to be argued over. It is the one place where I feel safe, and I am leaving it to the daughter who makes it safe. Trevor's expression shifted from anger to shock. You're really doing this? Yes. He looked at me like I had somehow engineered the whole thing. You knew, I answered honestly. No, but I'm not surprised. That hurt him more than yelling would have. He stalked out of the kitchen and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the old glass. For a second, I thought my mother might cry. Instead, she reached for my hand. You've been carrying too much, she said softly. I sat beside her. I'm used to it. That's what worries me. It took months for everything to settle. At work, the client contract was salvaged, but only after the leadership team handed me the final presentation responsibility and asked me to walk the executives through every assumption. This time I did not hide in the back. I stood at the front of the room, answered every question cleanly, and watched the same people who had ignored me before suddenly realize they had made a dangerous mistake. The contract closed. The department survived. Ethan did not. He was let go after the investigation confirmed a pattern of misrepresentation and internal misconduct. Rumor traveled faster than policy, and by the time he left the building, everyone knew why. The charming smile didn't save him when the evidence was printed, dated, and impossible to spin. He tried to frame it as a misunderstanding at first. Then he tried to blame unclear roles. Then he tried to imply that I had overreacted. None of it worked. The worst part for him, I think, was that nobody argued on his behalf. Once the magic was gone, there was nothing left to protect. Sandra received a formal reprimand for failing to address the issue earlier, and the department had to undergo an internal restructure. That was the corporate version of justice. Messy, delayed, and not nearly enough to repair everything, but real. As for my family, Trevor eventually moved out after the house trust was settled. He said he needed space, which was code for needing a new place to complain about. He spent a while telling anyone who would listen that he had been treated unfairly, but the truth has a way of making even loud people smaller over time, especially when they have no receipts, no support, and no one left to impress. My mother's health improved once the stress eased. Not a miracle, not some magical movie ending, just enough. Enough for her to breathe easier, sleep better, and sit in the backyard with a cup of tea without looking like she was bracing for the next attack. One Saturday afternoon, She and I were folding laundry when she said, "You know, your grandmother would be proud of you." I smiled a little. For what? For staying when it would have been easier to become bitter. I thought about that a long time. Because I had been bitter, in the quiet way people are bitter when they've been overlooked too often. But bitterness and justice are not the same thing. Bitterness wants everyone to hurt. Justice wants the truth to stand where lies used to live. A few weeks after the account closed, the client invited me to join a long-term leadership meeting as the technical liaison for the next phase. I walked into that room, not as Ethan's invisible helper, not as the quiet woman in the background, but as the person they now addressed directly. Denise smiled when she saw me.